What was that initial transition like for you and the organization as you moved from this more of an awareness campaign to, all right, we're going to start fundraising specifically for opportunities to get veterans the services they need?
When Boot Campaign was founded by the 5 Texas women who wanted to do something to give back, they were really smart in the sense that we were founded on sort of 3 main pillars. One being adaptability, right? We always adapt to the most pressing need of the military community. And so when we launched our health and wellness program, that was the most pressing need. And it still is the most pressing need today, right? How can we best serve the veteran and military community? And we see it as providing this individualized care for invisible wounds of war, post-traumatic stress, chronic pain, self-medication, insomnia, and traumatic brain injury. So that's sort of one foundational pillar of Boot Campaign, is always adapting to the most pressing need of the military community. The second piece of that is that everything that we do is individualized. And so as an organization, we want to look at both programmatically how we're delivering the care that we provide, but also how we work with our partners and donors. We're not a cookie cutter organization where you give us $5,000, this gets X, or you give us $25,000 and this gets Y. We want to make sure that we're developing these mutually beneficial partnerships. And then third is we were built on a foundation of financial transparency. So we're independently audited each and every year, and we can trace back all of the dollars and how they're donated and how they're used specifically to veteran care. And so to answer your question more directly, it was challenging in the sense that we were changing our mission scope, but it was also not challenging in the sense of it was something that was so needed and it was in the public vernacular, right?
Is that much of it? That's not much of a change for you, right?
My name is Carey. I used to load bombs in the Air Force, and now I'm a writer, a filmmaker, and an entrepreneur. Through using the post-9/11 GI Bill to go to college, working hourly jobs to pay the bills, and freelancing my way into a career, I've studied what it takes to successfully transition from service to civilian, and that study has become a conversation. On this podcast, I speak to other veterans, successful artists, and entrepreneurs about their transition, what they did well, where they failed, what they learned, and most importantly, how they applied their skills.
Episode 111 features Shelly Kirkland, the CEO of Boot Campaign, which unites Americans to honor and restore the lives of veterans and military families through individualized, life-improving care.
Welcome. This is Veteran Made. This episode is brought to you by Go Pills, a nootropic that gives your brain neurotransmitter support both acutely and over time. Those of us that served in the military, regardless of where we served and in what capacity we served, all came into contact with different chemicals, different percussions, and various elements of our environments that have affected our brain's ability to function. Think about your brain's performance and your mental health right now, yes, but think about your future too. We have so much more control over our long-term health than we realize. Visit gopills.com and use code VM15 at checkout for 15% off. That's VM15 for 15% off. Give your brain the neurotransmitter support it needs to perform well right now and over time.
All right. Good afternoon. Shelly, welcome to Veteran Made.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here as well. As I was telling you about before we hopped on, this is a quick turn episode. I'm glad that we're able to get this one out. And for those who don't know who you are and what Boot Campaign is, would love it if you could give us just a brief primer on kind of who you are and your start in the organization, and then we'll jump into some specifics from there.
Sure, I'll keep it super high level. But Boot Campaign is a 15-year-old nonprofit that was founded in 2009 by 5 women who wanted to do something to give back to those who served. And so they started the organization by using boots, hence the name, and putting boots on as many celebrities, influencers, and civilians as possible as an expression of gratitude. And so we've done a whole host of things over the course of the last 15 years, but have really narrowed down our programmatic focus since 2016. And we spend the bulk of our effort, energy, and funding in the health and wellness arena. And then we also have another program called Seasons of Service, where we provide specially curated gift boxes for deserving veteran and military families across the country. So to sum it all up, our mission is to unite Americans to honor and restore the lives of veterans and military families through individualized, life-improving programs. And I joined the organization in 2017, thanks to a dear Navy SEAL friend of mine, Morgan Luttrell. And I really, have always had a passion for the veteran and military community. My dad, my grandfather, and my cousin all served in various branches. But it wasn't until I met sort of this newer generation of veterans, those who, while I was having fun in college, were willing to lay their lives on the line for me. This post 9/11 generation, that I really wanted to do something to give back to them in a meaningful way. And so that's how I ended up here.
Yeah, as we were talking earlier this year, kind of gearing up for this, I remember one thing that kind of struck me as we were talking, which I eventually want us to get to, is that I need to stop saying that, the move from awareness and gratitude, not that that's not valuable and not that that's not appropriate, but that kind of move from awareness and gratitude into, like you said, these, life-saving and life-preserving options for veterans to engage in. And so your story as you got involved in the organization and grew to lead the organization is an interesting one, and one that I think our audience would be helpful for our audience to hear about. As you know, we talk on this podcast a lot about how do we take the skills in our previous life as servicemen and women and bring them to bear on this, new civilian life, right? Or this kind of renewed civilian life now that we're back at it on the civilian side of things. And so because you have a marketing and PR background, and then you've been tapped to lead this organization, I wanted to hear a little bit about what your transition was like from where you sat to where you sit now.
Yeah, that's a good question. I sort of have a varied background. When I graduated from college, all I really wanted to do was write. And that was sort of my goal. And I quickly learned through several internships that you don't necessarily make a lot of money writing for magazines, and living in New York is expensive. And so I got my start in the TV world as a producer for the Fox television show America's Most Wanted. And I did that for about 4 years, and then moved to Texas to try my hand in the advertising arena. And that was always very creative and interesting, but I really missed sort of the give back and the feel good nature of what I had previously done at America's Most Wanted, right? We were a TV show, but we also were getting justice for folks and finding fugitives and rescuing missing kids. And so I approached my boss at the advertising agency and I said, hey, I really want to do something else that's not all focused on the P&L. I want to do something that gives back. And he said, well, okay, we've got this nonprofit account. It's part of the University of Texas system. It's a brain research institute. Why don't you just, go over there and see what happens? And so I did, and I fell in love with it. And I actually went over to in-house with them, where I was their public relations director. And that's sort of how I got way more ingratiated in the veteran space, because as part of my role there was to help recruit for studies. And so the Research Institute had 2 Department of Defense funded studies, one for brain injury and one for post-traumatic stress and post-9/11 veterans. And so I met all these guys and gals who were struggling when they came home and trying to find a way to improve their lives. And so in meeting with them and talking with them, really it became a passion of mine. And so taking what I had learned both from the TV arena and the advertising arena to then recruit people to come together to get the help that they need was really something that made an impact on me, and hopefully made an impact on them for their future too.
Yeah, before we dive into the specifics for our community and your journey there, I'd love to hear about because I have a similar background, right? I went to film school. I didn't go to ad school. I really wanted to be a filmmaker, as a screenwriter and a director, and, kind of have that whole, indie film up to blockbuster, still kind of do the indie film thing, right? You think you can pre-navigate your career, right? When you're in college or coming out of the military, where you're like, oh, I'm going to go do this, and here's the path, and I'm just going to follow the path and do the work that's right in front of me, and blah, 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 blah. But what ends up happening as you do the work that's right in front of you, other options emerge on the path, right? And so you're working in you want to be a writer, you're working in production, and you kind of get into advertising. What was that like for you to navigate those spaces and kind of see the things that were opening up for you as options that you hadn't previously considered? And were you thinking long-term about a career path at that time? And was this like a big shift, or was it one that you were just chunking it out and kind of following what was in front of you?
The nonprofit world?
or just mean from TV to advertising, that time frame?
Um, no, I think I was so young in my career at that point. I was really just looking for a job that was going to be fun
Sure.
and exciting and creative. I don't think I had sort of big aspirations to, one time open my own advertising agency or anything like that. But it sort of allowed me, if you ever worked in an advertising agency, you're exposed to so many different things, so many different types of businesses, so many different types of organizations. And so it allowed me to sort of become a generalist at so many different elements, right? You have to do a little bit of account service, you have to do a little bit of PR, you got to do a little bit of marketing, you got to do all sorts of different things and wear many different hats, which is actually suiting me really well in the nonprofit space, as we have a small team here at Boot Campaign and we all wear many hats.
It's almost like you're a seasoned PR and marketing person answering the question the right way. I love it. No, I mean, I think that's kind of spot on, and it kind of takes us into the specific story of you kind of becoming the leader of the organization. Can you tell us exactly how that happened, and then we can jump in?
Sure. So I was actually the PRIA director again at this Brain Research Institute, and really focused on not only the veteran space, but anything that was improving brain health. And one of the veterans that came through the research study there was Navy SEAL Morgan Luttrell. And he's now U.S. Congressman Morgan Luttrell, and he had a brain injury in 2009 in a training accident off the coast of Virginia Beach. And he came as part of his rehab to where I was working at the time. And we became good friends from that and stayed in touch. And he said that first week that we met, he said, when I get out of the SEAL teams, I'm going to come back here and I'm going to get my PhD in cognitive neuroscience. And I sort of chuckled to myself and thought, no chance. This guy's going to come out of the SEAL teams, come back, get his PhD. Fast forward about 3 to 4 months later, he's emailing me from Afghanistan. Here's my application for grad school. Will you take a look at it? And sure enough, he did come back. He got his master's in cognitive neuroscience and was accepted into the PhD program. And as part of that, he sort of had this little side hustle where because he was a SEAL, he was afforded opportunities to rehab all across the country. He was sent to the best of the best places. And he had guys and gals that he served with, both in the special operations community, but again, in the conventional forces, who were saying, hey, I'm struggling with this. Where did you go? I'm struggling with that. Where did you go? And so it became a little bit cumbersome for him to sort of point people in the right direction. And so he approached Boot Campaign and said, hey, I have this idea for a health and wellness program. Would you guys be interested in it? The board approved a sort of adopting his brainchild. And then he came into my office one day and said, hey, you're going to leave here and you're going to go work for Boot Campaign, to which I said no. And he was persistent, and I sort of let the doors open as they would, and joined the organization in 2017.
Why did you initially say no?
Just because it was something new. And I think I was not 100% confident that I was ready to lead the organization, right? I had a lot of leadership experience. I had a lot of nonprofit experience, but I had never been solely responsible for an entire organization before. I have a dear friend of mine who's a retired 2-star general who I, talked to about a lot of different things. And I talked to him about this specifically. And he was like, Kirkland, do you think you're not good enough? And he kind of just put me in my place and was like, why wouldn't you do this? And what I was feeling was that the responsibility was solely on me, right, to lead this organization. And it is ultimately the responsibility is mine, but I also have a board. I have an incredible staff. And so I just sort of jumped in with both feet and haven't left yet.
I love it. So, I mean, what was your initial charge then as you stepped in to lead and remind me of the year?
2017.
2017. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what was your initial charge as you stepped into that leadership role? Were you replacing an existing CEO? Was this a role that had been created? And then you and the board were working together to build out the organization? Like what was the size and scope of Boot Campaign at the time? And what was your initial charge?
Yeah, so Boot Campaign had been around gosh, I can't do math that quickly in my head, but had been around about 8 years when I joined the organization. And so there was an existing CEO who had recently departed, and Morgan actually was the interim CEO when I joined the organization. And so he was the interim, and my charge essentially was to help grow the health and wellness program. They had just launched it prior to my tenure. And so they had never had a program like the one that we've created today. And then, of course, as CEO of a nonprofit, you're always responsible for fundraising and making sure that you have the donor dollars to support the programmatic efforts that you're going to deliver. And so it really was building from the ground up, essentially, a new way of doing things in the health and wellness space. We had not done that before as an organization. And so it was really starting from scratch, getting the best team, getting the best providers, getting, processes in place, and then, of course, raising the money to make sure that we can deliver it to as many veterans as possible.
Yeah, my apologies to the congressman. I can't remember if I said this before we started recording or after. I got Marcus and Morgan mixed up. So my apologies to him and to you. But so a few things I want to dig into here, and a couple of things that have been coming up kind of in the community. One, and you already mentioned it, right? He talked about tier one operators and then the special operations community at large, they get the bulk of the attention, and rightly so, right? In many regards, the things that they're doing, the ways that they're doing them are spectacular, and only a very, very small percentage of those that served can actually do those things. And so it is important to highlight those. The other piece, though, is the conventional side of the house oftentimes gets not completely left unnoticed, but kind of in comparison gets a little bit unnoticed. And I love that as he was talking about it to you, he was describing, hey, yeah, I'm working with other special operations troops and talking to them about what they're doing, but I'm also working with all these other guys and gals who have been affected, mentally, physically, emotionally, relationally, whatever it might be throughout their service. And we need to serve kind of everybody. And so that's one piece. And then the other piece is, again, like we opened up with, moving from a kind of awareness and, I lost the word, a kind of an awareness campaign and more into how do we provide opportunities for services that can help these folks. So what was that initial transition like for you and the organization as you moved from this more of an awareness campaign to, all right, we're going to start fundraising specifically for opportunities to get veterans the services they need? Was that difficult? Was it easy? Was it simple? Was it complicated? Like, what were those initial days like for you?
Well, I think, there's a multitude of ways I could take that question.
Sorry, I have a bad habit of asking like 3 questions in one. I get excited.
That's okay. I think firstly, when Boot Campaign was founded by the 5 Texas women who wanted to do something to give back, they were really smart in the sense that we were founded on sort of 3 main pillars. One being adaptability, right? We always adapt to the most pressing need of the military community. And so when we launched our health and wellness program, that was the most pressing need. And it still is the most pressing need today, right? How can we best serve the veteran and military community? And we see it as providing this individualized care for invisible wounds of war, post-traumatic stress, chronic pain, self-medication, insomnia, and traumatic brain injury. So that's sort of one foundational pillar of Boot Campaign, is always adapting to the most pressing need of the military community. The second piece of that is that everything that we do is individualized. And so as an organization, we want to look at both programmatically how we're delivering the care that we provide, but also how we work with our partners and donors. We're not a cookie cutter organization where if you give us $5,000, this gets X, or you give us $25,000 and this gets Y. We want to make sure that we're developing these mutually beneficial partnerships. And then third is we were built on a foundation of financial transparency. So we're independently audited each and every year. And we can trace back all of the dollars and how they're donated and how they're used specifically to veteran care. And so to answer your question more directly, it was challenging in the sense that we were changing our mission scope. But it was also not challenging in the sense of it was something that was so needed, and it was in the public vernacular, right? Like people were talking about PTSD and TBI a lot. It was getting a lot of news coverage. We were having guys and gals come back saying that they were struggling with these things. Of course, there's still stigma surrounding both of those issues. But what we saw really was that we were meeting a need that wasn't being met. And we were doing something different in how we approached it through this individualized care, that because Morgan started this program in the special operations community, in working with them, if you have success with them, you're sort of given the green light across the board, right? Their friends talk to their friends, talk to their friends. And if you don't have success, you're sort of blacklisted. And so what we found is that we had tremendous success. And so word spread naturally. So we didn't have trouble recruiting for veteran participants. It was more making sure that the supporters that we had understood the change in our scope, and that we were raising as much money as possible to provide care for as many veterans as needed it.
Yeah, I think something that we all tend to forget as a culture, both within the military community and military, adjacent community, as well as just our American culture at large in society, is that like so 2017 was 15, 16 years into the global war on terror in earnest. Going on 10 years from then, right now, right? Like this was a very, very long period of time in our history, and we're still in it, right? And kind of have been in it. And, we all learned about Vietnam and kind of how long that took, but that was really the last time that our culture really experienced something like that. And then we get into Afghanistan, we get into Iraq, and we're doing all of these things. And then we're building off of those, invisible wounds of war, and people who did their best, right, coming out of the Vietnam War to understand what those wounds are, how they manifest, what they're caused by, what they're not caused by, right? We're learning a lot about childhood trauma and how that affects us as we go into service and then coming back out of service, right? And all these things. So when you talk about changing the scope of the mission and you talk about that mission becoming front and center, that was a really interesting time in kind of American media and American history to really tackle that. What kind of weight did you all feel in those moments as you were making that shift in mission scope?
I think that weight still exists, right? It's not that weight's been lifted. I think that weight is still very heavy. I think for all of us on staff at Boot Campaign, it's something that's so meaningful and something that we carry with us each and every day. I think, right now, the buzzword in the veteran space and the veteran adjacent space, like you referenced, is the topic of suicide. And that, there are lots of things that can lead to suicide. And some of the invisible wounds of war that we're individually treating through Boot Campaign, we're hoping to stave that off, right? We're hoping to make sure that no veteran feels like that's their only way out, is to end their life. And so for us, I think it's a constant reminder of where we were, but also where we want to be. One thing that came out not too long ago, speaking of suicide in the research arena, is that on average, it takes 11 years from a traumatic event for someone to reach out and seek help. And so that was just broadly, right? And we did some data diving into our own data and found that on average, the veterans that were reaching out to care from Boot Campaign, it was 11 years since they separated or retired from the military before they even reached out to us. And so in those 11 years, like you mentioned, all of that trauma gets compounded by just life, right? Whether or not you're in service, you're active duty, or you're a veteran in the civilian world. And so we want to make sure that veterans know that their service and their sacrifice matters, and ultimately that their lives matter. And we want to give them the care that they need so that they don't feel that suicide is the only option.
So as you and Morgan were looking at the strategy, right? Like you're looking at high level strategy, all right, here's the direction that we want to move in. Like, what did you engage tactically? Like, how did you pull all the resources that he found as he was traveling around and getting treatment? And then how did you implement those as services that Boot Campaign could help veterans receive? I mean, and feel free to get into the weeds on like how it all works. This is primarily a kind of creative and entrepreneurial podcast where folks actually do really enjoy kind of hearing the nuts and bolts and like how these things get put together. So how did you move through that tactically? What were the steps that you all took And how did you get the programs in place initially?
Yeah, I think initially it was basically who Morgan was familiar with, right? And then there were some organizations that I was familiar with, treatment providers that I was familiar with. But what ultimately we decided to do was hire the right staff, and to make sure that we were delivering certain treatment protocols ourselves as boot campaign. And then obviously there's certain things that we cannot deliver as an organization, like inpatient treatment for self-medication, right? We outsource that, so to speak. So one of my first orders of business was to hire Dr. Jenny Howland, who is our clinical psychologist on staff. She has decades of experience working with the veteran and military population, as well as first responders. And she's a military spouse herself. And so really having her sort of look and lead the archetype of what the health and wellness program should look like and how we can individualize that care. We have a staff of tremendous case managers, both with military experience and themselves. We have a veteran on staff who's one of our case managers, as well as 2 military spouses. So they're very familiar with this space and are culturally competent in how to work with veterans. And essentially, we look at each veteran from head to toe. We want to make sure that we are taking into account their body and their brain, and then, of course, wrapping our arms around them holistically, right? We don't provide emergency financial assistance or employment support, but we have other partner organizations that do. And so while we're treating the brain and the body, we're able to say to them, hey, if you want to look into this job arena, here's somebody that you can be connected with. And so we're able to do those warm handoffs and make sure we're supporting the veteran as a whole.
So how did you map those relationships, right? Relationships that you had, relationships that he had, relationships that these subject matter experts that you're bringing onto staff have. What was it like to kind of coordinate, triangulate and map those relationships and get it into, the functioning kind of set of relationships that it is today?
Well, I think part of it comes back to everything is individualized, right? So no veteran's path through our pipeline of care is going to be the same. And so we're able to map different relationships based on the veteran. We are always looking at different modalities that are coming online. We've seen a tremendous need for focused attention and sleep, right? We've always addressed sleep, but we've really seen a need for focused attention in that with a specific protocol. And so we were able to get some funding recently this year, and we're working on a whole sleep modality in-house that we'll be rolling out next year. And so we're constantly evaluating and reiterating based on what we're seeing from the clientele that we're serving. I think for us, we always want to look at people who are rooted in science, right? Making sure that everything that we do is scientifically validated, as well as the gold standard of care. We want to make sure that what we're doing is individualized. And so even if we need to send somebody to treatment for self-medication, we want to make sure that that care is individualized for them as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we're halfway through September. This episode is going to be live this week. Quick turn recording here, and September is Suicide Awareness Month. As you've talked about, it is a month where you're able to talk about it kind of in volume, but it is something that gets spoken about all year. And obviously it's already come up in this conversation, and rightly so, because it is a struggle that our community is having both collectively and individually. So what was the birth of the You Matter campaign and that campaign, and how did it get going, and what has it become today?
Yeah, so obviously this You Matter campaign was launched back in 2020. So we were in the height of COVID. All of our in-person events where we do a lot of fundraising was canceled. We were seeing a dramatic rise in applications for care through our services. And a lot of people, not only were they reaching out to us for care, but they were also saying, hey, I have some suicidal thoughts, right? So we wanted to do something to sort of address that, but also be able to raise the profile of the challenges that the veteran and military population are facing when it comes to suicide. And so we said, hey, let's just launch a t-shirt I'm wearing it today. You can sort of see, just says "You Matter." And we'll put it on our website, and we'll do it for 1 week. We'll do it for Suicide Awareness and Prevention Week in September of 2020. And we'll just see what happens. And so we did it. We launched it. I called a couple board members because these two words at that time also could have had a different connotation. And I said, hey, we're gonna launch this. I wanted to get your feedback if you're okay with it. And they said, absolutely, please do it. And so we launched it. And day 5, we were like, holy smokes, I cannot believe that people are latching onto this in such an engaged way. And so it took on a life of its own. So we said, well, we'll lengthen the time that the shirt's available. We'll make it for the entire month of September back in 2020. And then people just couldn't get enough. And so it's now a message that we push all year long, obviously with a concentration in September. But we've had folks write into our website who don't have anybody who served in the military or any in their family or any knowledge of the suicide issues in the veteran and military community. And they're like, these two words meant so much to me. I want to make sure that a veteran who served for me isn't feeling the same way. And so it's transcended sort of just the veteran space for us. And it's two words that everybody needs to hear, right? It's an issue in the veteran and military population, but it's a human issue. And we want to make sure that everybody knows that their lives matter. And of course, especially those who serve in our armed forces.
How do you think about, on that specific note? I was actually trying to figure out a way to ask this question. You gave me the right softball here to hit, like the bridging the military civilian divide in this country. Again, back to being at war for over 20 years. I do not want to get political here, but obviously, one of the presidential candidates said that we don't have anybody deployed. We, in fact, do have people deployed. It's very easy as a community for us to rightly criticize the way that we drew down our troops in Afghanistan and to focus on that event as a microcosm for the war and how those of us that served and those of us whose family members have served have been affected. Again, total validation there, but it also keeps our frame a little too narrow and a little too focused on just a couple of things instead of the fact that, hey, we've been at war in this country since September 12th, 2001. We still are. Your organization is helping to combat the invisible wounds of war that those who served in that conflict are experiencing. What do you notice about the military civilian divide and the staff that you have that have touch points with the military community but aren't in the military themselves, that bring their expertise to bear? And just like, so, I guess maybe scientifically, obviously there are very specific things that civilians are doing to help, but then culturally, what does the military civilian divide kind of look like to you these days? And how is your organization helping to facilitate bridging that divide?
Gosh, another 3-part question.
I know.
I do want to clarify one thing. So one thing that also makes Boot Campaign unique is you mentioned in the setup for this question, post 9/11 only veterans. And that's not who we serve as an organization. We serve any veteran of any era. And so there are a lot of organizations that are solely focused on post 9/11 for tremendously good reasons. But our scope is a little bit broader than that. We want to make sure that anybody who served is getting the care that they need. So we open to any veteran of any era. I think in the military and civilian divide space, gosh, I mean, there's so many things that could be and should be addressed. I think the attention span of the civilian world is very short. And if it's not making headlines and screaming on your news every single night about these veteran issues, people forget. I think people don't understand what it means to be in the military, basically, like just that, period.
Right.
I don't think they understand what that means. I don't think they understand all of the jobs that military folks have, all the MOSs within the military. I think people often only think of, combat facing veterans as the only veterans that exist, and that's not true. So I think for us, there's so much that needs to be done on the education space. and making sure that we're explaining what it is like to be in the military, what the challenges are for not just the veteran and the active duty service member, but their families. How can we address those? How can we educate the civilian population? There was an event this past weekend that my team was attending. We were a beneficiary of in Louisville, Texas. And one of our veteran ambassadors who served for over 30 years in the Marine Corps in the EOD space was speaking. And somebody raised their hand and they were like, I don't understand what EOD means, right? So just explaining some of the things that we're around all the time just because we're in this space, and helping folks understand what it means to be a veteran, what its life is like after you get out of the military, and then what it means for your family as a whole.
Yeah. It's something that we need to find, continue to find more and better ways to tell each other our own stories. Right. Mm-hmm. And that, like, the military community, we're very good at telling our stories, right? Our combat stories, or our deployment stories, or our transition stories, or whatever those things might be. And I found it, kind of out of the health and wellness space, but just into the transition space in general. Like one thing that I have found is that a lot of military veterans will transition into the civilian space, get the job that they want in, marketing or logistics or creative services or whatever it might be. And we lose sight of the fact that while we were serving, the folks that we're now working with and working for have developed these aptitudes for the thing that we now want to do. So yes, while we need to bring who we are and what we've done and where we've been to bear on our new experiences and our new skills as we develop them in the civilian workspace, we also need to step back and say, oh, okay, what do you have to offer me? Right. Like, and we as a community tend to be, I don't want to say falsely humble, because that's also not fair, but we kind of have this, like, I'll figure this out. I'll do it myself. Like I will, like you said, with trauma, right? Like 11 years from the moment and before we say anything. Well, at a smaller scale and kind of like lower stakes, a lot of times we'll be a few years into our transition into the civilian workforce, and we still haven't asked the basic questions about, hey, I actually don't know how to do this thing in this industry. Can I get some help with that? And so I think if we can foster conversations between the civilians and the military and the military and veteran community as we move forward through all of these spaces, it will help us collectively get better at understanding each other and understanding how we can help each other move, kind of forward through history.
Well, and I think every veteran's experience is different, right? I think about, like, my dad served in the Air Force, and not in a traditional wartime experience. He was a physician, right? So his experience in the military was totally different than some of the guys and gals that I'm working with right now. And so for people to understand that we're all just human and we all have different experiences, we all have different strengths and different weaknesses. And if we can just bring that together, that's what makes up the beauty of America, right? And I think we as a country have lost that, especially in recent years.
Yeah, I think that's right. So September 2024, what are you doing this month? What does the rest of the year, what does kind of Q4 look like? And you've mentioned a couple of things that are in development for 2025, but where's the organization now? What are you working on at the moment? What are you working towards? Again, another three-parter.
You just like three-part questions. So now, obviously, we are in the midst of our big You Matter push for September. We are, we moved away from solely awareness as a program, right, to do more what we do from a treatment perspective. But awareness is still a huge piece of what you have to do when you're trying to get people the care that they need. And so for us, we're getting the message out about You Matter. We have a whole host of events coming up this fall. On the treatment side of the house, we have seen a steady increase in need for services. We've had more veterans than ever before reach out to us for care. We currently have over 340 folks in our pipeline receiving those individualized treatment protocols. And then our secondary program is called Seasons of Service, and we execute that 2 times a year. The second time of year is around the holiday season. So we're gearing up to bring as many volunteers as possible into the Dallas-Fort Worth area, where we take over a warehouse for a full week and shop and individually wrap each of these gifts to support those who serve during the holiday season. So got a full slate for Q4 for sure.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so back to you. I'm curious, like, what has your CEO journey been like for the last, let's see, 7 years? Like, what has the experience been like for you? Where have you grown? What's been kind of most challenging? What's been most rewarding?
Gosh, I'll start with most rewarding. Most rewarding is definitely seeing the impact that we make and the lives that we touch. The water faucets turn on every time that I'm able to speak with a veteran who's received care for us as part of our pipeline of care at the end of their journey when they're graduating. I get to have a one-on-one conversation with them. And that's the most rewarding piece of my job, is to be able to speak to them, to hear about their journey, to where they started, why they reached out to Boot Campaign to begin with, and then to see where they ended up, and what their hopes for the future are, and how we can continue to help make that possible for them. So that's definitely the most rewarding. I think the most challenging is, when I first started, in 2017, we were really getting solid with where we wanted to go and who we wanted to be. And then COVID happened. And so we had to adapt and change course, and maintaining, our flexibility, and maintaining ourselves as an organization, right? There were a lot of organizations that folded in that arena of time. And for us, we were able to get stronger. It actually was a blessing for us to go through that, because it helped us to adapt into some virtual programs and platforms that we're able to deliver and be successful at. So I think the most challenging thing for me, broadly as a human, is to really get better with separating and working on some boundaries, right? It's difficult because we're dealing with humans and we want the best for them. And some of the folks you get to know well, and you want to make sure that they're well taken care of, and making sure that, we stay true to who we are and what we do, get them the individualized care that they need, and support them on that journey.
Yeah, COVID was interesting, right? And curious your experience, because you come from the media background, you come from, production and creativity and campaigns and marketing and all these things. Like I noticed when I was working at an advertising agency right when COVID popped off, and we were launching an at-home beard care brand for men for Gillette, a sub brand for Gillette at Procter and Gamble, and we weren't doing it because of COVID. We had been developing a campaign right for 6 months prior. You know how these things work, and then we get onto set, we shoot this spot, we shoot a bunch of footage. We've got all these assets, and we're getting ready to run them on TV primarily at the time. And then, COVID happens actually while we were on set. And then we get into post-production on all of this work. And I mean, we got really lucky, right? An at-home beard care brand for men, right? As a global pandemic pops off, where people can't go to the barber and people, can't leave their homes. They have to do all this stuff themselves. Like, how incredibly lucky did Procter and Gamble get? How incredibly lucky did we get as an agency? And obviously not everybody was as lucky. A lot of people lost jobs and lost their lives and all those things during COVID. So I don't want to minimize that. But, speaking from like a programmatic standpoint, like, we got lucky. So we just engaged a bunch of overages and just kept making more content and putting it out. And the brand was very successful because of that. How did your background in production, advertising, PR, marketing, how did that help you pivot pretty quickly during COVID to adjust your approach? I know you mentioned it as a challenge, but how did those skills that you brought help you lead the organization to move in that direction?
I think, right, everything changes all the time when you're dealing with media and production. I'm at America's Most Wanted. I was flying up to New York for one story, and another story would happen. They would put me on a train to Newark. It was kind of, there was never a consistent anything. And so I think I sort of reverted back to using those skills of how can we make this, instead of a challenge, make it a strength of ours, right? How can we harness the potential that we have to bring people together virtually and get them the care that they need? How can we educate others about what's going on in the military and veteran space because of COVID, right? People had longer deployments, unexpected deployments. There were lots of things changing. And so we were able to address that to really, use the power of social media for good, essentially, to get those messages out. And I think it really ultimately led us to a stronger health and wellness program specifically, but then also a stronger organization and team, right? We went through this together. Everybody came as part of it. It wasn't just me, right? I may have the title of CEO, but our whole team was in. We were ready to roll up our sleeves and make it happen. And the biggest thing, I think, was keeping everybody positive, right? Which is what we all needed to do as a country. So.
Yeah, no doubt. We got a few minutes left. So usually, and I'll still ask the questions at the end, but I kind of want to frame it this way so that we can maybe just finish up with this bit of the conversation. So at the end of every podcast, I ask, what's on your heart and your mind for our community? Could be a piece of advice, something you want to get off your chest, or something you want to reiterate that we've already talked about today. I'd love to finish talking about the options that military veterans have and the choice fatigue that has set in for a lot of us who might be thinking about seeking care, might be thinking about seeking just somebody to talk to or an organization that can help. There's so many. I think it's 46,000 VSOs and nonprofits registered with the IRS in this country. So there's a ton of options, right? Like all my friends who host podcasts, and we all say, hey, there's tons of options out there. Just reach out, right? Just text me or call me or DM me or reach out to this organization. And that's amazing advice, because those things are there. But a lot of times a veteran will hear that, or a service member who's getting ready to get out and has no clue what they're going to do, or just needs to talk through some options. They're like, well, just call somebody or just reach out to one of these organizations. Like it's just very overwhelming, and that kind of choice fatigue sets in. So as you look at the landscape of military and veteran nonprofits, VSOs and all of that, how would you encourage military veterans to navigate those choices and navigate the field, so to speak, that's in front of them?
I'm going to answer that in a practical way and then a big picture way.
Great.
I think from a practical standpoint, there may be 46,000 veteran service organizations, but they all serve different types of veterans, right? So they may be specific to an MOS, they may be specific to an ERA, they may be specific in the type of care that they're providing. So you really need to look at what you need as a human being, and then what, for lack of a better way to say it, type of veteran you are to fit within that, right? So if somebody is coming to boot campaign, so to speak, for mortgage assistance, that's not what we do, right? So everybody has great websites. Go online, look, and make sure that what you're looking for is actually what the organization provides. I will say word of mouth is the best way to know who's doing good work in what space. There are some very big organizations that you can get into their funnel and they'll help you with a whole host of things. But definitely word of mouth is what we see. I would probably say over 75% of our candidates come from other candidates who received care from us. So talk to your friends, talk to civilians, right? And ask somebody to help you. It's interesting. I had this conversation. I have two kids, a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. And my son yesterday, we went for a walk on the beach, and he was frustrated. And I was telling him, he was visibly frustrated, kind of being sassy. And I told him, you can have all of these emotions, but it's how we channel those emotions to get to where we need to go, right? So I told him, all you had to say was, Mom, can you help me? And then I'm really ready and willing to help you with whatever you need. And so I think, yes, there may be choice fatigue, but veterans just need to ask for help. And asking for help can be asking an organization, it can be asking a friend, it can be asking a family member. Someone who can help point you in the right direction is really going to get you where you need to go.
Yeah, that's a great. Thank you for sharing that anecdote. It reminds me. My sister, she's a Montessori teacher. She's a whiz with kids and development and all those things. And she has a magnet up on her refrigerator, and a little sticky note that she wrote for my niece that says, all emotions are valid, all behaviors are not.
Yes.
So you're allowed to experience the emotions that you're behaving, but that should drive some very specific good behaviors that you should be looking. And a lot of times that means humbling yourself and just asking for help, right? And I think it's a really good note to the veteran community and the military community to say, hey, crowdsource this, right? Like talk to your friends, talk to people. Yeah, reach out and say, hey, I'm dealing with this, or I need somebody, or even say, hey, asking for a friend, right? This person needs this. Like, what are some of the best resources that you have? And we can chunk it down and get a little bit closer to our circle of trusted friends and people that we know and respect and trust and love that can maybe point us in that right direction. What's your bigger? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to also say there's also not always one organization that can solve everything for a veteran, sure. Right? And so I love when I see high profile or notable veterans who have large followings on social media, and they have more recently started sharing their struggles with Invisible Wounds of War, of course, just because that's what we deal with at Boot Campaign. And they'll tag 6 or 7 organizations who've been involved in their care, right? That's awesome. And that's what we need to do more of, both as a collective human population, but also as VSOs. I think what's missing oftentimes is this collaboration of care and making sure that we don't do this, but we do X and you do Y and you do Z. Let's come together to make sure that there's this safety net underneath this veteran so that they get what they need from a whole host of us, because the end result is even going to be better than if it was just us.
Right. Just like you all did at Boot Campaign, right? Where it's like, hey, we're going to pull all the best of the best of the best from all these different areas, triangulate those resources, package them up in a way that is individualized to the veteran. It's not generalized because of all of those levels and hierarchy of competence, right? It's actually taking it and then individualizing it down to the veteran. So what's your big picture advice for veterans as they're navigating that space?
I think ask for help. I think have more open conversations, be transparent. Transparency is a huge value that for me as an individual is important, but also Boot Campaign as an organization. If we don't know everything that's going on with you, we can't help you in the best way. And so being as open as possible, be, for cliche term, be as vulnerable as possible with whoever you need to be vulnerable with to get you where you need to go. If that's just reaching out coldly to an organization like Boot Campaign, reaching out to a veteran friend of yours, I know that anybody who answers a call from a veteran would much rather answer that call than be notified that somebody else had taken their life. So make the call, reach out, check on each other, make sure that we're doing what we can to take care of one another.
I think that's right. Shelly, where can folks find you or the organization? Where do you want to drive traffic? What can we link out in the bio and tag and all that good stuff?
Yeah, check us out at bootcampaign.org. We're on all the social media avenues. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all at Boot Campaign. LinkedIn as well. I know you're super active on LinkedIn. And then I'm in several of those places personally too. So looking forward.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I will. We'll tag away. We'll tweet. We'll post on Instagram and LinkedIn, all that stuff. I'll get in touch with the social team and collaborate on some of these posts and get them out there for folks to hear your story and the organization's story. I really appreciate your time and your energy and your work and what you do. And thanks again for reaching back out so we can get you on. I know we kind of framed that. Is there any last parting words, anything that's on your heart, your mind that you want to share with us?
I think ultimately we're all human beings and we all have our own struggles. I've dealt personally with depression and anxiety before. And it really is making sure that we put in the work, right? It's not an easy thing to do to ask for help. It's not an easy road to walk to get the help that you need. But if you have the right people by your side, you're going to do the work yourselves and you're going to get to a better place. And I know that was true for me personally. That's something that always keeps me rooted with the folks that we're caring for at Boot Campaign, is just to make sure that we're supporting one another, make sure that we're walking alongside one another and doing the deep hard work to get better.
That's a good word. Shelly Kirkland, appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you too.
All right, we'll see you.